Cars is a surprisingly fleshed out video game franchise, as well as a very established movie franchise, meaning there have been a lot of Cars games, maybe some that you didn't even know about. The aim today is to rank all of these games from the PC releases to the home console ones. Now, just some rules: we are not counting mobile games and we are not counting flash games because this video would be very, very long, and I can't play all those because some of them are no longer available. Now, before we begin, don't forget to subscribe for more Cars content, as well as other content with talking vehicles. No, seriously, subscribe. So without further ado, we're going to start off with the games in the bottom tier. So for the first entry in our bottom tier, titled Pain, we have Cars 2 for the PSP. Oh man, where do we even start with this one? Cars 2 PSP is a slot racing game. To sum it up, it barely functions as a game, it's glitchy, it's ugly, and honestly, compared to the other two versions of Cars 2 the game, it's just awful. It's such a letdown. Even the DS version was better, and that tried something quite ambitious. This could have been a dumbed down version of the console game, but it could have also just been a port of the DS one. I don't know what they were thinking here, and I'm so glad this one's basically been forgotten about. Moving on. Next up, we have Cars Radiator Springs Adventure, a minigame collection released for the PC. Oh man, this one again, it's just not good. Some of the minigames barely work. It's ugly as anything. It's basically just a glorified flash game collection that you have to pay real money for. In fact, on Steam right now, this game is £16.75, so just about $20.
You can't keep getting away with it!
For what you could just play online for free. I don't know why anyone would buy this, really. It's not good. Now, my final game for the Pain tier is Cars 1 for the DS. Now, this is again another minigame collection, and to be honest with you, isn't quite as bad as the other two games in this tier, but it's just so disappointing compared to all the other Cars games on the DS. Now, please remember, this is an opinion-based tier list, so if you want to place this somewhere else, that's completely fine. For me, Cars 1 on the DS is just not good, and it should just be at the bottom. Credit where it's due though, this is the best of the three in this tier, and at least the minigames actually worked properly. Okay, so next up we have the C tier, which is really for games which I appreciate what they're going for, but again, they're still not very good. So first up we have Cars for the Game Boy Advance. Now, it was always going to be a difficult thing to do to translate the Cars 1 video game onto a Game Boy Advance, and I've got to give credit where it's due. The game looks fantastic, it's just the gameplay is not good. It's a top-down racer, which is just a genre that should stay dead. It's not fun, and you can't really see the corners coming up as you race towards them. Lightning handles fine, but the other cars that you can play as all just feel very weird. But hey, it's colourful and the idea was there. Next up we have Cars 2 for the DS. Now, this game was a lot more ambitious than Cars 2 for the PSP. They tried to basically get you to play through the whole story of the film, rather than just races and missions like Cars 2 the main game does, but unfortunately a lot of these sections do fall really flat. The stealth sections are just plain boring, sometimes the handling is really off. The races themselves are kind of fun, so it gets a bonus for that. But as a whole, just a very mid to rubbish game with a nice idea behind it. So next up we have World of Cars Online. Now this is probably going to be quite a controversial take, but please let me explain. This is based off of the current state the game is in now it's been brought back. Now, I couldn't possibly comment on where this game could rank whilst it was out because I never played it. It has now been brought back by Sunrise Games, and in its current state, you can basically just drive around and race on your own. And that's kind of it. You can't buy anything yet because it breaks the game. There's stuff locked behind memberships that you can't pay for because obviously they can't take any money for it. So, in its current state, it's nice to see it's back, and I would like to see this further up on the list, but as it is now, it's a C tier. So finally for the C tier, we have both handheld versions of Cars Race-o-Rama, both for the DS and the PSP, because these are essentially the exact same game. The PSP version is just a port of the DS one. And I hate to say it, these games, compared to the other couple of handheld ones we'll talk about, are just nowhere near as good. They're uglier, they don't run as well, the lighting's really off, the handling is weird, I don't know man. I liked what they were going for here, and it followed up on some really good handheld ports before it, but this was just not it. So next up we have the B tier, which is for the games that are pretty good. They still have some issues or they aren't perfect, but they're pretty good. So to kick off we have Cars Mainternational for the Game Boy Advance. Now, from a technical standpoint, this game's mere existence alone grants it a spot in this tier, but it's actually a pretty decent racer as well. It's not the most perfect game I've ever played, but the fact that it came out on the Game Boy Advance as late as it did and it looked as good as it did is a miracle in itself. Yes, it doesn't save properly and you have to use codes, that is a pain in the... but it's a really cool game, I'm not gonna lie guys. Then next up, speaking of Mainternational, we have the DS port, which is basically just an upscale version of the Game Boy Advance port with saving and some additional content. Again, this game handles very well, it looks nice, runs nice, there's not really much else to say about it, but it's not amazing, so that's why it's in B tier. And finally, we have the main console version of Mainternational as well. This game is essentially a glorified DLC to the original Cars game. It's pretty fun, it does lose some points for what I would say is even worse physics than the first game, some very bad stereotyped racers. Although they are cool designs, they were just frankly offensive stereotypes. I don't know, it's pretty good. I honestly prefer the handheld versions of this game, but it's pretty good and it definitely deserves a spot on B tier for expanding on the original game. Okay, so next up we have Cars 3 Driven to Win. Now, my opinion of this game has lightened over time, and I have come to see that this is actually a much better game than some of the others that I have covered. And Cars 3, I'm sorry for the abuse I gave you. If you're playing this on a PS4 or Xbox One, this game runs great. Just don't get it on any other console because it just doesn't work and it looks awful. It's basically just a dumbed down version of Cars 2 with less content, and this game had a very short development cycle due to some Disney Infinity cancellations, but what we got is pretty good. So next up we have Cars Race-o-Rama, the actual main console version. This game was the game that kicked off my Cars series on the channel, and again my opinion of this has got better over time. Story wise it's definitely worse than Mainternational, but in terms of the customization content and the physics is what gets this game a place on the B tier. And also it was just nice to have Chick Hicks back properly, so there we go. The game was also the last voice acting role for the late Randy Savage, and El Machismo is just iconic, and again, that's why it's in B tier.
I'm gonna shake your shocks, bend your rims.
Now our next and final game in the B tier is Cars Toon Mater's Tall Tales. Now, I know I'm yet to make a full video on this game, but I have finally got around to looking at it and playing it, and out of the 3 Cars minigame collections that we have, this is by far the best one. It's by no means a perfect game, and I'm not a big minigame fan, but I couldn't put this any lower than B because it would just be offensive to a lot of the other games. So our first game in the A tier is Cars 1 for the PSP. Now, this game does lack the free roam that the main game does, but by god is it a competent racer, it's really good. It has some really good exclusive maps, it handles really nicely, it has its own little unique story. Honestly, this game is as good as the main Cars 1 game. If you haven't played this game yet, I would highly recommend playing it, it is a really good time. Now the only other game that I have put in A tier is Cars the video game. Now this game really set quite a high standard for movie tie-in games, and I just love it, it's great. Yes, the physics are janky, yes there are some interesting design choices, but honestly this game has aged pretty well. It gets bonus points for having the original voice cast as well, and all in all is a pretty good time. Now, those design choices and physics are the only thing keeping this game from being in my top tier, but it's a great game and I love it, so please don't think that I'm dissing it. And that finally takes us to the top tier of Ka-Chow. Now, there was only one game for me that could fill this slot, and that is Cars 2 the video game. This game really is the perfect kart racer. It's as good as the older Mario Karts, it's just as fun, it looks great, it holds up nicely now, like over 10 years later. This game here in the UK was a pretty big deal when it came out. I remember going to a game convention called Game Fest in Birmingham, and Cars 2 the game had a really big booth there letting people try it out, and because I was a kid at the time, it was one of the few games I was actually allowed to play, so this holds a special place in my heart. It really is a good time, and it's backwards compatible on Xbox One, so you should definitely play this one. So that takes us to the end of my Cars games ranked. Now of course, everyone's opinions on this are going to differ. I'm sure you would place some of these games in different places, and if you do, I'd like to know about it. Put it in the comments below. What do you think should be top tier? What do you think should be bottom tier? Share it all in the comments below, but please keep it friendly. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and tap the bell for notifications for future uploads. It's greatly appreciated. And as always, I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.